In this episode, we talk about the longest transport tunnel in India, which is being constructed by the Indian Railways as a part of the Rishikesh-Karnaprayag railway line. We also talk about the central government's decision to revoke visas of Pakistan nationals residing in India. But first, we talk about the Indus Waters Treaty. Hi, I am Niharika Nanda, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. A day after 26 tourists were killed in a terror attack in Pahalgam last week, India took a series of steps against Pakistan. One of them was putting the Indus Waters Treaty on hold. The treaty, in essence, divides control over the 6 rivers of the Indus Basin that flow from India to Pakistan. Signed over 6 decades ago, it has been a remarkably durable agreement between the two countries, surviving multiple wars and periods of high tension. But India now putting a pause to the treaty has sparked a big question. Could this allow India to stop the flow of these rivers into Pakistan? And what exactly does putting the treaty on hold mean for both the countries? To find this out, my colleague Shashank Bhargava speaks to the Indian Express's Amitabh Sinha, who has been reporting on this treaty for the paper.
Amitabh, we understand that this treaty was signed in September 1960, and it was signed by Jawaharlal Nehru and Muhammad Ayub Khan, the second president of Pakistan. And this entire deal was actually brokered by the World Bank. Can you begin by telling us what exactly this treaty relates to?
Right. So, Indus Water Treaty is about sharing of river waters between India and Pakistan. And it relates to 6 specific rivers. 3 of them have been allocated to Pakistan and the other 3 to India.
Right, there are these eastern rivers which are allocated to India and western rivers have been allocated to Pakistan.
Yes. And the east and west names are slightly misleading because they are all actually flowing in the same direction. So the eastern rivers are Satluj, Beas and Ravi. These are the 3 eastern rivers. And the western rivers are supposed to be Jhelum, Chenab and Indus. Now the western rivers just mean they are towards the west of the eastern rivers. They are not actually flowing in any different direction. So broadly, the directions are all the same. Some of them are actually, flowing parallel to each other. So the east and west sometimes can be confusing. The west is just west relative to the eastern rivers, and east is east relative to the western rivers. That's all it is.
Okay, so the treaty says that India can make unrestricted use of all waters of Satluj, Beas and Ravi, and Pakistan is supposed to get waters from these western rivers, Indus, Jhelum and Chenab.
Yeah. So see, the natural flow of these rivers is from India towards Pakistan before going into the Arabian Sea. Now, what the treaty says is that the western rivers, that is Jhelum, Chenab and Indus, which have been allocated to Pakistan, on those rivers, India cannot use those waters for itself. In the sense, you can obviously, if you want, you can take a bucket of water from it and use it. That's not what it means. What it suggests is that you cannot divert the flow of those rivers. You cannot create large dams in that river, so that the flow of these waters is, relatively speaking, uninterrupted, and most of the waters travel to Pakistan. On the eastern rivers, which is Satluj, Beas and Ravi, India can do whatever it wants, meaning it can set up dams, it can set up storage facilities, it can divert and put it into the channels, use it for irrigation or whatever. So that is what the distinction is. There is also a slight nuance here. It's not that on the western rivers, India does not have any right. It has some limited rights up to a certain amount it can use. So it can use that water for agriculture purposes. It can even use it for electricity generation, provided it does not create any storage or dam. So on the western rivers, India has limited sort of a thing. On eastern rivers, India has complete right.
And since there are restrictions, for example, that India can't divert water or store a lot of water on these 3 rivers, I'm guessing this treaty came about because of those concerns, right? Concerns that India could do that.
Yes, of course. I mean, the relations between India and Pakistan have never been very, very cordial, even at that time. And this is not a unique case. Everywhere, the concerns of any downstream area or a downstream country, it's the same. The upper riparian, lower riparian states, the lower riparian states anywhere in the world have the same sort of concerns, and the upper riparian states have the same sort of advantages anywhere in the world. So this is not a unique case. It's just that the history of India and Pakistan was such that there was a trust deficit about what might happen, and therefore it was largely in the interest of Pakistan, being the lower riparian state, to get a sort of an agreement done. And it has, again, something that probably, our listeners would also be aware of, and they might be reading, the fact that it has worked very well till now. Even though the countries went to war with each other on 3 occasions, this particular treaty was never disrupted. It went on quite well.
Right, and it is only now, after years, that this treaty is going through a slightly turbulent period. In fact, over the past few years, there have also been demands to renegotiate this entire deal. But tell us, when we talk about, these 3 rivers that Pakistan is supposed to have access to, Indus, Jhelum and Chenab, how much does Pakistan actually rely on them?
So depends on what figures you see, but officially I think 65% of Pakistan's irrigated land actually depends on these rivers. It's irrigated by these rivers, also for their electricity consumption, certainly for irrigation and drinking water. The dependence on these rivers on the Pakistani side is huge, is very big. Relatively speaking, on Indian side, even on the eastern rivers, the dependence is not that much. And that is one of the reasons why you would also hear that even what was allocated to India, India was not utilizing all its rights on these rivers. It was not just not utilizing its rights, the limited rights on the western rivers, but it wasn't fully utilizing the flow in the eastern rivers as well, which is where India was completely free to do whatever it wanted. And the biggest reason for that is that our dependence on these rivers is not that much, in sharp contrast to Pakistan, where it's an existential issue. It's a matter of life and death for water coming into these rivers.
And Amitabh, now that India has put this treaty on abeyance, it has suspended it, what powers does it give India? What does it allow India to do?
So what does holding in abeyance mean? That's also not very clear. Now, what happens is these are rivers. These are naturally flowing rivers. You cannot stop the flow of the river suddenly. What do you do? So even if you divert the rivers, where do you take them to? Right? So the problem there is that it's not as if suddenly from tomorrow onwards, or even say 3 months down the line, suddenly, water would stop flowing to Pakistan. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, and right now you have so many memes and videos floating on the internet with people expressing concerns and even making jokes that, India will stop the water going into Pakistan, almost as if there is, this big tap that India is now going to turn off.
Yeah. So that is what one needs to understand. It's not a tap or a switch that we are talking about, that we have this switch and then you switch it off and the water stops and Pakistan begins to starve out of water. So that's not the case. What is the danger here now? The danger is it's not about stopping the flow of water to Pakistan. It's just about introducing even slight uncertainty in the flow of water, in what flows, right? And that would be enough to actually devastate Pakistan. That is the problem. So if you make the flow, both the quantity and the timing of the flow, if you are able to bring in a little bit of uncertainty into it, that itself can have a debilitating effect on not just on Pakistan's economy, but again, as I said, it's on the very existence of a lot of people, on their livelihoods and on their drinking water, electricity production, everything. But how do you bring in that uncertainty? As we talked about, there is no switch. You can't turn it off. You can't suddenly change the direction of the river. What you can do possibly is create some sort of infrastructure, mainly in terms of creating, a few dams or storage facilities. Even if small ones, that's what I'm saying. You don't have to create big dams. Even if small reservoirs, check dams, if you are able to create, which disrupts the flow and makes this flow a little bit uncertain. So that when Pakistan is expecting certain amount of water to flow in, it doesn't flow in at that time. It flows in, say, only 20% of the water flows in, or 20% is too less. Actually, even just 80% of the water flows in, or it flows in after a particular time, after a 3-day interval or 4-day. That kind of facility you can create wherein you bring in the little bit of disruption, a little bit of uncertainty in the flows, and that itself would be very, very devastating for Pakistan.
Right, and this uncertainty would be particularly damaging to the agricultural sector, right? Because farming, for example, relies so much on certainty, so much on timing.
Yes. So you have to have a certain amount of seasonal flow, right? So you don't have to stop the waters completely. Just introduce that uncertainty, just disrupt it a little bit, and that would be enough. Now, if you remember, a similar kind of thing had happened in 2016. After the Uri attack, and then the Prime Minister had went and spoken that famous line where saying, no, blood and water cannot flow together, and essentially using the Indus waters once again as a sort of a leverage. And at that point of time also, there had been the same kind of discussions that we are having now. And at that time, we didn't have a lot of infrastructure. We hadn't built, and as I said, even the limited rights that we have on Jhelum, Chenab and Indus, the western rivers, we were not utilizing those rights. But since then, in 8-9 years since then, we have created some infrastructure well within the provisions of the Indus Waters Treaty.
And here are you talking about the 2 hydroelectric projects that India had started, one on the Jhelum River and the other one on Chenab, which Pakistan had actually objected to.
Yes, but these are not just the 2. As I said, what got into news are these large projects. But you can actually create havoc even with small sorts of infrastructures, check dams and small reservoirs and those kind of things, or creating a channel. So these things, the situation from 2016 is very different now. So some amount of infrastructure has been built. Not everything that India can do under the provisions of Indus Waters Treaty, but at least some of what India can do, that has been created or is in the process of being created. And it takes time, but once you're able to build it, you're still not stopping the flow of water. You don't intend to do that, but you have greater control over the timing and flow of water.
And earlier when I asked you what putting this treaty in abeyance allows India to do, you said, it's unclear right now what abeyance even means in this case. But can India, for example, choose to ignore the restrictions that this treaty puts on it regarding what it can or cannot do on Indus, Jhelum and Chenab?
I'm not sure whether India is actually inclined to violate the provisions of the treaty. Keeping it in abeyance can even mean that the regular meetings of the Indus Water Commissioners, for example, does not take place, right? The sharing of data which is mandated under the Indus Water Commissions, that gets delayed or is not entirely shared or only partially shared and those kind of things. I am not sure whether by keeping it in abeyance, India wants to ignore the provisions of the treaty and build something which is not covered under the provisions of this treaty. I don't think that is the meaning. And that's also the reason why India has not talked about walking out of the treaty.
Right. And can it do that? Can it walk out of this treaty completely?
So the treaty has elaborate provisions for dispute redressal, but there is no very clear-cut provision about how to end or walk out of this treaty. So it doesn't give you a provision which you can invoke and say, I don't obey by this treaty and I walk out. But as sovereign country, you can obviously walk out and say, I don't obey the treaty.
Right, we are still at a point where we don't know what the ramifications of doing this will be. in terms of international law and so on. But are there concerns that you can think of, any fallouts that India should be careful about?
So one of the things that India has to be careful about, and I'm not sure whether it's a consideration, but it can be a likely fallout, that while India is the upper riparian state in this situation vis-a-vis Pakistan, it is the lower riparian state vis-a-vis China. And there are some rivers that flow from China into India, most notably Brahmaputra. We have a much bigger dependence on Brahmaputra than China has. And there is no river sharing. There is no similar treaty between India and China. And China doesn't have that much of dependence on Brahmaputra, but in recent years, it has been building some sort of structures on the other side. And just because India and China do not have a proper treaty, doesn't mean they don't cooperate. There is a regular exchange of data, seasonal flow data and all on Brahmaputra. That keeps on happening. So there is a lot of cooperation of flood data comes in. So those arrangements are in place and that happens. But the problem here is that if you do something like this with the Indus Waters Treaty, it might just set a bad precedent wherein you might be at the receiving end of a similar treatment vis-a-vis China.
Yeah, and with China, India has been concerned because last year China had approved the construction of what will be the world's biggest dam, and that dam will be built on the Brahmaputra.
Yes, so that is one thing that India probably is aware of and careful about, that China has an upper hand with regard to Brahmaputra and some other rivers.
And now, moving on from the tensions between India and Pakistan, we talk about an ambitious project being undertaken by the Indian Railways. Currently, the Railways is in the process of constructing what is slated to be the longest transport tunnel in India. This is going to be a part of the railway line that will connect Rishikesh to Karnaprayag in Uttarakhand.
So this is another major, very significant project of Indian Railways, where the Railways is going to construct a 125-kilometer long railway line from Rishikesh to Karnaprayag.
That's the Indian Express's Dheeraj Mishra, who reports on railways for the paper.
It will connect to some of the very key major districts like Dehradun, Tehri Garhwal, Pauri Garhwal, Rudraprayag and Chamoli. This railway line will ensure connectivity to the very far villages which are in the upper stretches of the mountain in Uttarakhand, and it will directly connect to those villages where to travel from the areas in the upper region of the Himalaya, it is still very difficult. So this is significant in terms of it will kind of ease the mobility of the people living in those areas.
And Dheeraj, this 125-kilometer long railway line, we understand will include several tunnels and bridges, especially because it will cut across the Himalayas. Can you tell us how much of this stretch will comprise these tunnels?
So the project is designed in such a way that, out of the 125 kilometer long track that will be in this project, 83% of it is in just tunnels. So you can imagine that, the most of the area covered under this project is in the tunnel only because of the region, because of the terrain. And the project will have a total of 12 new stations. It will have total 16 main tunnels, big, large tunnels. And there are 19 major bridges. So there will be a total of 19 big bridges which will cover this whole project. The highest bridge is the Gauchar Bridge, which will be 46.9 meters high. And the longest bridge will be the Srinagar Bridge. In terms of length, it will be half a kilometer long.
Right. And last week, the project actually completed a significant milestone, which was also witnessed by Union Railway Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw. Can you tell us what this milestone was?
Yeah, so there is one tunnel which is 14.58 kilometers long. This is going to be India's longest transportation tunnel. So currently, the longest railway tunnel which is famously called tunnel number 50. It is on the Katra to Banihal stretch of Jammu Kashmir railway line. That tunnel is operational. It is 12.75 kilometer long. But this particular tunnel which is also called Tunnel number 8 or Jansu Tunnel. It is situated in the Jansu village area of Uttarakhand. So it will become India's longest transportation tunnel. So what happened recently, in the last week, the breakthrough of this tunnel completed. So breakthrough means, the tunnel are being excavated from the two different points, from the two other side when they start excavating the tunnel. And when they meet at a particular point, the way it was surveyed or the way it was planned, if it meet exactly at the same point, that meeting of two different ends is called breakthrough. So that breakthrough got completed. That means the tunneling work is over. Now the finishing of the finishing of the tunnel will start and it will get completed as soon as possible. So that is what happened recently. And Union Minister for Railways Ashwini Vaishnaw and Chief Minister of Uttarakhand Pushkar Singh Dhami both were present during that time.
And Dheeraj, you write that this project is using state-of-the-art technology, moving away from the old blasting methods that used to cause a lot of damage to the mountains. In fact, this is the first time that the railways is using the tunnel boring machine. But what kind of challenges have they faced in the project so far?
So the first and foremost problem that Indian Railways faced, it was supply of machinery, it was supply of all kind of materials to a very high altitude, including this tunnel boring machine. To carry this machine to at a very high level and to deploy it into the tunnel for the excavation, it was a very big major task for the railways. And also, not only you have to supply all these kind of materials to a high terrain, you have to also ensure that it must remain uninterrupted, because for these critical kind of work like breakthrough, the tunnel boring machine have to work continuously. Also, sometimes you would have also seen that when they excavate the tunnel, there is a lot of water flow from inside the tunnel. So, the engineers have to plan in such a manner. You have to stop water or you have to channel that water to ensure it passes in a different direction. So, these are some of the very major challenges. Also, given the geology, given the terrain of the area, a lot of time landslide happens because of the monsoon and everything. So, it adds to the challenges of the railways.
And this route is expected to cover a distance of 125 kilometers. What kind of benefits are expected once the work is completed and the railway route is operational?
See, first thing is that, this railway line is passing through some of the very key pilgrimage centers in Uttarakhand. And throughout the year, a number of people travel to the Uttarakhand, especially for religious purposes. So I think that will kind of help these pilgrims to reach the area easily. Number two, because it passes through very important districts of Uttarakhand, like Dehradun, Tehri Garhwal, Pauri Garhwal, Rudraprayag and Chamoli. These are important districts of the Uttarakhand. So in a way, this will connect to kind of trade centers of these districts, and it will kind of encourage the business activity across these districts. And also, of course, it will reduce the travel time and cost, and it will boost the tourism sector in a whole. And these reasons are also very important from the strategic point of view that, we have to ensure that we have a very good connectivity to our borders of the country, so that in any scenario, if there will be any need, we will be able to respond quickly at the right time in a right manner.
And Dheeraj, since a big part of this project involves building tunnels through the Himalayan mountain range, what kind of environmental concerns does that raise? And have there been any discussions regarding that?
Yeah, so there are some environmental concerns because, the activists, those who are expert, they have been flagging this issue of not only this particular project, but, they have been raising issue that, unabated construction in the Himalayan region is going to adversely affect the whole area, because Himalayan mountain are kind of comparatively very younger mountain. So they say that the concerns are that, you are tunneling, you are excavating these mountains, you are disturbing the whole ecology. But on the other hand, the arguments are that we cannot let the people who are living in the very far-reaching villages, where we're living in the very remote villages of the mountain. There are some places where people still have to travel, many hours to come to the market, to come to the, main center of the city and then go back. So the logic is that we have to connect these places, which will kind of be beneficial on the both side. One, the people of these remote villages will get connected to the main center of the city. One, another thing is that it will boost the economy in a way, it will boost the tourism. So these are the things, these are the arguments and counter arguments. These are ongoing.
And lastly, Dheeraj, is any part of this project functional yet? And when can we expect the project to be fully operational?
Yeah, so there is a very small stretch. It's 5.7 kilometers long from Veerbhadra station to Rishikesh. It is operational since 2020. But the government has set a timeline of completion of the tunnel by December 2025. After that, other works like laying of the track, electrical works, signaling and telecommunication, the work on all these other sectors will start.
And in the end, we talk about the Indian government's measures post the Pahalgam terror attack, as a part of which visas of Pakistan nationals residing in India are being revoked. The Indian Express's Sujit Bisoi reports that according to the officials, the state government of Odisha has issued exit notices to 12 Pakistani nationals residing in the state for years in various districts. While many of them have been staying on long-term visas, some have been staying without valid documents. The city's Deputy Commissioner Jagmohan Meena said that one of the people is from Bhubaneswar and 3 such notices have been issued in Cuttack and 1 in Balasore. Among those hit is 55-year-old Pakistan-born Sarada Bai, who is married to an Indian citizen and has been living in Odisha for more than 3 decades. According to Sujit's report, Sarada Bai, now Sarada Kokreja after marriage, was born in Sukur city in Pakistan's Sindh province in 1970 according to her Pakistani passport. She said that the district police sent her an exit notice stating, quote, "As per our available record, you neither have a valid LTV, long-term visa, nor come under the above exempted category of visas. Hence, you are directed to quit India at the earliest as deemed proper, failing which legal action will be taken against you." Unquote. Sarada said her father came to India on a 60-day visa with his 6 children in 1987 and settled in Odisha's Koraput district. She got married to a businessman in Bolangir about 35 years back and now has a son and a daughter and 2 grandchildren who are Indian citizens. Sujit reports that Sarada, who claims to have a voter ID and an Aadhaar card, said that she applied for Indian citizenship long back but has not been able to get it. Speaking to the reporters, she requested the Indian government to let her stay and not separate her from her family. She said, quote, "Ever since I came here, I have considered India my country. My family is in India and I don't want to go to Pakistan. I have never even spoken to anyone in Pakistan, even over the phone." Unquote. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank, Bhargava and me, Niharika, Nanda. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.